Hello and welcome to this week's installment of Sunday Sermons with Jake Ryan. Today, I want to talk with you about porn. That's right, you heard me, porn. And more than that, I want to talk about why I do not think that porn is actually the problem that people make it out to be in our society. Now let me start by saying that I actually saw this issue come up a lot when working as a clinical sex and relationship therapist. And the reality is that porn can trigger insecurities in a lot of us for a lot of different reasons, and I want to unpack some of those today. So, for starters, I think it's important to acknowledge what porn is and what porn isn't. Porn is not sex ed. It is not going to teach people what sex actually looks like in real life with the awkward starts and stops and the smells and the sometimes laughter, which can be a good thing. It's not going to show that sometimes a man isn't going to stay hard all the time, and that's fine. It is normal to need to take breaks or to switch to maybe focusing on your partner's pleasure while you work on getting hard again, or being flexible. A 15 to 20 minute video could be filmed across 4 to 6 hours. And so keeping that in mind should hopefully help you understand that watching porn is not at all reflective of what actual sex looks like. Porn is fantasy. It shows scenes with people who maybe are unattainably hot to us. Maybe these men have above average penises. The women might have either naturally or surgically smaller vulvas, because that's what porn has decided is sexy. And so I think remembering that the people that we see in porn tend to have above average bodies, or bodies that are closer to the beauty standard that society holds, should help us remember that we do not need to compare ourselves to them. Whatever you look like is totally fine. You are, if you desire to be, a sexual being, and you can and will find people to have real connected sex with, even if it does not look like anything you'd see online, because your sex life is for you. It isn't about getting views and brand deals or whatever. Obviously, OnlyFans is a thing these days. I'll get on that in a moment. But the people who work for traditional porn studios, they look like people that people want to watch have sex, and that's why they have the job that they have. And unless you are trying to also work in porn, you do not need to look like them. It is fantasy. Another manifestation of porn being fantasy is that sometimes when a partner finds out what their partner has been watching, they get the impression that, that's what they want me to do. And I want to make it clear that people can and often do masturbate to things in porn that are not at all things that they would want to try out in real life. It's a fantasy. And even though partnered sex can be great, a lot of guys in relationships might still carve out some solo time for masturbation with or without porn, just because jerking off is nice. And it's enjoyable to do something that's just self-indulgent. It's for you. There's no pressure to perform. You don't have to care about anyone else's pleasure. And that is, often a theme that comes up in a lot of porn, especially heterosexual porn, is it's not about the woman's pleasure. And this again connects to porn not being sex ed, is most women do not orgasm from penile penetration alone or with a dildo. It's clitoral stimulation is what gets them off. And so, you might see some actors in some videos who actually take the time to care about their female partner's pleasure, but more often than not, it's about getting the dick inside the hole and then getting the money shot. That is what is considered sexy. It's what sells. It's what's considered hot. And even in scenes where both partners come at the same time, super hot to see, but it again adds a pressure that partners feel when having real life sex that they can and should be coming at the same time. So it's also important to note that a lot of my work with individuals and couples is managing their expectations on what sex should look like and what it entails. And it doesn't necessarily have to involve penetration, and it doesn't have to be orgasm focused. And because so often sex is penetration and orgasm focused, it puts a lot of pressure on people about the end result, the flashy, showy ending, as it were. When, if you have deeply connecting, enjoyable sex with someone for 20, 30, 45 minutes, whatever, however long is enjoyable for you both, even if neither of you orgasm, if you can say that you honestly enjoyed that time spent together and the pleasure that was experienced, then that's what matters. So, porn does a number on a lot of us. I think just because we do live in a pretty sex negative society that doesn't really teach us what sexual empowerment or good sex looks like. I think those of us who got sex ed, we might learn a little bit about male and female anatomy. We learned that a cis man gets hard, he ejaculates inside a cis woman, and if it's the right time, then he gets her pregnant, and then a baby comes along. We are taught that aspect of sex, but we are not taught about the pleasure. We are generally not taught about sexual communication, which is almost non-existent in porn. There's just the assumption and portrayal of readiness and opportunity, and people go, hey, let's, bang it out, and just, somehow they're on the same page, which generally does not happen without communication. So, all this about how porn is fantasy and isn't sex ed is important to understand. But more importantly, I think, is the fact that blaming porn is just a simple scapegoat for deeper issues in a relationship. There are people who are certified as porn addiction therapists, and I don't think that porn addiction is real either. I think something one of my master's level teachers said was that addiction is a failed attempt to solve a different problem. And that really shifted how I thought about regular addiction with drugs and or alcohol. But I do think that applies to some extent to this question of porn addiction. When I worked with men in a different framework, which is referred to as out of control sexual behavior, which is sexual behavior that men, think, I want to rein it in, or be more mindful about my reasons for pursuing this, that, and the other. We would look at whether their behavior was impulsive or compulsive. And impulsive is about just poor impulse control. We get the desire to seek out sex or to Google some porn and start masturbating, and there's just very little time between impulse and behavior. Viktor Frankl has a famous quote. I don't remember the specifics of it right now, but it's about increasing the time between impulse and response. And so people who engage in impulsive sexual behavior, it's just thought crosses their mind and they go, yeah, let's do it right now. No questions asked. Really just no thought is given to it. Or people think, oh, I want to stop, but I can't control my impulses. And people can learn to control their impulses when it's hard, and that is, in many situations, very necessary work. On the other hand, was compulsive sexual behavior, which is sexual behavior that's meant to sort of act as an emotional regulation. So, say that we're feeling rejected or just sad or like a failure in some context, and we don't like that feeling. It doesn't feel good. It's not easy to sit with. So what that person does is they seek out porn or sex with another person to sort of validate themselves, or at the very least distract from that negative feeling. They think, well, I don't want to feel this bad thing. I want to feel a good thing instead. And so compulsive sexual behavior isn't actually about porn or sex, it's a means of distracting ourselves from feeling something that we don't want to feel, which, believe me, I can, and in other contexts will, talk about that a lot, because there's a lot to say about that, especially because so much of my work has been with men, and realizing that we are just generally framed as always ready, wanting, and able when it comes to sex. And it's just really powerful to see men sort of connect those dots and recognize, like, oh, this is what I'm told I'm supposed to be as a man, but I don't actually feel that way, and that's okay. It does not make you any less of a man to not be always ready, wanting, and able when it comes to sex. I also want to talk about how some of this cultural framing, can negatively influence relationships, and how uh, talking about porn can actually be really useful for couples to learn some more stuff about themselves and deepen their relationship. Uh, Instead of just scapegoating porn and saying, "Oh, he has a porn addiction. That's the problem. We solved it." That's like slapping a band-aid on, a big gaping wound and being like, "Yep, okay, we solved it." It's like, no, it's an answer, but it is not actually the answer. So let me give you a clinical example to help clarify where I'm going with this. I had a potential client reach out to me a while ago, years ago at this point, and he said, "Hey, my girlfriend's really mad at me because she found me watching porn on my computer, and at the beginning of our relationship, we agreed that I was going to give up porn." And he's like, "But I didn't really want to do that." He's like, "So I was just trying to be secretive about it, and then she found out, and now she's super upset with me." And then he said, "So I'm wondering, like, can I book a session with you, and you can just like explain to her that, like, this is just how men are wired, It's like that's just what we do, and that it's not really fair for her to ask me to give that up. And it doesn't mean that I don't love her. It just means that, like, I just need her to know, like, this is how men are." And I paused for a second, and I said, "Okay, well, I'm not going to do that." Um, I said, "If you do want to book a session with me, a couple session, what I can explain is that I don't think that watching porn in a relationship is inherently problematic, and we can talk about the concerns that she has, whether it's the content of what you're watching, or what she thinks it means about her. We can clarify that you are attracted to her, and maybe even that you are enough for her in many ways, but this is something that you enjoy." And so I explained that there's entry points into meaningful things that they can discuss, the dynamics in their relationship, establishing more open communication. But I was like, "But I'm not going to just explain that all men are wired this way, because I, first of all, don't even believe that, and secondly, that's not helpful." I said, "If you want therapy, therapy's about actually doing the work, not just me helping you gaslight her and get you off the hook." So yeah, it's a conversation that people can, and I think in many times cases should be having with their partners, about what sexuality is all about to them, what kinds of sex they enjoy with their partner, fantasies that they might be interested in, things that they know that they definitely would never be into. um, and being able to have these conversations in an open, non-judgmental way is something I think most of us are very unfamiliar with. But it can be so healing to be able to acknowledge, like, this is part of my interest, and I want to share all of the parts of myself with you, but I'm scared that you might judge me or think less of me, or just be creeped out. So it can be a really rich opportunity to work on your relationship. But this guy was unfortunately not interested in that. And he goes, "Okay, well, that's not what I'm looking for." And he asked, "It looks like there's another male coworker at your site. Do you think that he'd have a different answer?" And I was like, I feel pretty certain he is going to have an answer that very closely echoes mine." I was like, "As sex therapists, as relationship therapists, we want you to have great sex and a great relationship. But lying and taking the easy way out is not how we get there." So I really think that if people could learn to have real, honest, vulnerable discussions and use the insecurities that porn brings up in whatever ways as entry points to such conversations, people could have much deeper relationships. Again, having these kinds of conversations and this kind of vulnerability is not really modeled for us enough in our world, which is, of course, its own problem. But that is why it is so easy to let porn be the scapegoat. Like when let's say, a female partner in a heterosexual relationship finds out that her husband has been watching porn, she might, maybe they have been having less sex than they would like, or maybe it's been years since they've had sex. It would be so easy for her to just write it off as like, oh, well, it's because he's watching porn that he's getting his sexual needs met, and we're not connecting in that way. That is a really easy storyline for people to buy into, because it goes, oh, porn is the problem. Or, stemming off of last week's talk, it's you're the problem, instead of it being a relational problem in which both partners play a role. Very often when partners aren't having sex anymore, it's because of a loss of vulnerability in the relationship. They likely just have fallen into routine. They might feel like they're taking each other for granted, or at least one party feels that way. They aren't having the vulnerability and connection. They just feel like they're just moving through their responsibilities. Maybe they're just really stressed out and at each other's throats. And again, maybe it's one side more than the other. But that context does not allow for sexual desire to exist. People have to want to be emotionally and physically vulnerable with their partner in the way that sex requires. And when they don't feel that they can be emotionally vulnerable and get that connection, the support, the concern, the compassion and care that they're looking for from their partner in other contexts of their relationship, they are not going to be having sex. And so, I think I'm beating a dead horse here, but yes, so much easier to just be like, oh, well, it's because you watch porn that we aren't having sex, than acknowledging all the heap of other emotional, relational challenges that have gotten them to that point. Now, a bit of a segue, but I promise it'll all wrap around and make sense eventually. But speaking of scapegoats, as a way of addressing the bigger issues, is the way that trans people are treated in society. And an interesting interplay here is the online interest in trans porn, along with the absolutely overblown legislative focus on trans people, especially considering that trans people are at most 1% to 2% of the population, and they are simply people who are trying to live authentic lives. They are not trying to hurt people. They literally just want to exist as they are, and yet record numbers of bills legislating their existence have been passed each of the past few years. And it is an insane overreaction, much like people might overreact to finding out that their partner has been watching porn. And trans people are just such an easy scapegoat to go to because of the position that they hold in society. So you may or may not have heard or understand that we live within rigid binaries that were imposed by colonialism, white supremacy, all that good stuff. What I mean by this rigid binaries is there's this idea you are either a man or a woman. There's no in between. There's no third option. It's just, and all these higher binaries are hierarchical. So we live in a patriarchal society. So men occupy the dominant position, women the bottom position. Because people do not fit into rigid binaries. There was the heterosexual, homosexual. Well, the existence of bisexual people disproved that sexual attraction is binary. And similarly, trans people prove that our gender is not binary, that they can feel like a blend of the two or like neither. Um, they could feel like they are the other side of the spectrum from which they were assigned at birth from their genitalia. And the thing is that people are messy and complicated. And transness proves that. But also, a lot of people who by default might identify as cis also need to critically reflect on their gender and what it means to them. Because it is not as simple as, oh, I have a penis, and therefore I think of myself as a man, and I like cis women, sports, beer, cars, guns, and planes. That is a whole bunch of layered assumptions that are conditioned into us. Similarly, having a vulva doesn't automatically mean that a person will identify as a woman and be into cis men, like the colors pink and purple and shiny things and glitter. It doesn't mean that they'll enjoy sinking hundreds and thousands of dollars into their appearance and watching romantic comedies. People are not simple. We are often told that we are defined by who or what we are attracted to. And this can cause challenges for people who have attractions that society has kind of suggested that we shouldn't want. There's a deep shame around sex and sexual attraction in this country. And I think that is what makes both porn and trans people easy scapegoats. Because both ultimately come down to sex and sexuality. And it's just so easy to write those off as just supercharged issues, or, well, there's the idea that sex is dirty and deviant. And cis people, cisgender people, people who identify with the gender that was assigned to them at birth, it's so hard for us to see because of the ways that privilege is set up. But when all the stuff that's put on you, all the assumptions, don't feel like they fit, you start to see the system more easily and go, wait, this isn't about me. This is about control. So, trans people, in rejecting the assumptions that are put on them because they identify as something other than what doctors and family assumed based on what's between their legs, trans people say, no, actually, I feel like this. And that's a beautiful thing, to be able to resist what you are told to be and to be who you actually are. But going back to this deep shame, if you watch the show Pose, then you'll remember that Dominique Jackson's character, Electra, said, they don't kill us because they hate us. They kill us because they hate what it means to love us. So, yeah, people who are attracted to trans people feel deeply ashamed because they think that it means something about them, when really it just shows that we are not as simple as the binaries that we live among would suggest. You can have whatever genitals you have and identify however you identify and be attracted to whoever you are attracted to, and none of that needs to be a problem unless you internalize the societal messaging that says that that's a problem, and then shame comes in. Interestingly, a lot of recent data suggests, and I'll include a link here to back this up, that red states are often the ones most interested in trans porn. So, yeah, they're the ones that we see the most legislation against this population in, and yet it creates this taboo where it's interesting. It's like, why are you voting for people who you know are very anti-LGBTQ when you have this interest? It's there's just a lot of interesting stuff to further explore in that context. But yeah, like I said, trans people are such a small part of the population, and yet they're given so much attention, and it's not really about them, but it's about what it says about the rest of us and about society. And really questioning, like, are we just going to accept this messaging that says to be a sexual being or to think outside the box of how we can and should identify? That just makes us wrong. Like, sex is, in my opinion, one of the most natural things in the world, and it's why each of us exist, is because two people had sex. In most cases, 99-ish plus percent of cases, it's because two people had sex. And then 9, 10 months later, we were born. And yet we are taught to shame the very thing that gave us our existence. Uh, it's just such a cop out to say, trans people are the problem or porn is the problem, when really they tell us so much about us as individuals and us in community, and we are really robbing ourselves of a huge opportunity for growth to just stop there and say this is the problem, no further thought needed. Um, Take that next step, think about things. Differentiate about what actually says anything about you versus what is just a passing interest or isn't indicative of who you are as a person. Fears and insecurities are a natural part of being human, and relationships do inherently trigger these fears and insecurities. But it's not enough to blame porn and pretend you've resolved these issues with another person or even with sex, gender, and sexuality when you haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg. Move past fear, or allow fear and courage to exist in the same space, and reflect on these things for yourself or with an important other in your life. I hope that this has shown you that, yeah, there's so much out there that can help us make sense of who we are and who we want to be if we are willing to look past the shame that does not even need to be there. Um, you can be sexual and still be a good person. You can exist outside of society's norms and still be a good person. Norms are not about what's actually normal, it's about what's normative, or what has power, and it's all about control. So, yeah, sex is about pleasure. Being human is about experiencing all that life has to offer. And so don't just shut yourself in a box with labels that the world gives you and decide that that's good enough when you could actually be and experience so much more if you were just willing to let yourself. So that's that for today. I will see you in 2 weeks. And until then, take care of yourself and be kind to others.